All right, so we are going to talk about rendering Gutenberg blocks in the front end. And by front end, I mean the website, not the editor side. It's not front end like in the client side or the JavaScript side. It's on the user-facing side. Some people refer to this as isomorphic blocks. I know isomorphic is a term used in the React ecosystem to talk about React components that are rendered on the server side, on the front-end side, but I don't know, it seems like this is called isomorphism in the Gutenberg world. So yeah, let's start with some things that relate to the current status of Gutenberg. Some things that are important to remember. WordPress uses React in the editor. That's the decision they made. They actually don't provide any means of using React on the front-end side. They decided to use React to build a better experience for integrating with the editor and building new blocks. But mostly the blocks are still rendered with PHP on the front end. At least the dynamic blocks are, we'll see that later. And this means you actually have two different render logics, one on the JavaScript side for the editor and one on PHP. In most cases, this can have many variants, but this is the general rule. So there is no official or standard way or supported way to do this. There are no docs or support for rendering React on the front end, but I think they are going to do something about it at some point, because it's like a natural evolution of what they did. So you don't get any goodies like utilities or any features by default from WordPress on the front end to actually do that. So you have to roll your own thing, which is what we did. And it went pretty well so far. And it's pretty straightforward, so I'm going to show you. So this is more or less the agenda for this presentation. I think it will be useful to revisit WordPress rendering for each kind of block, not only the React ones. Then we have some key places to look. The register block type function, both in JS and PHP. The save function of the register block type call, then the webpack config file, the enqueue script call, and the deprecated property in blocks, which is also important, and we'll see why. So let's check how Gutenberg actually renders blocks. The blocks are registered in the editor and in PHP. Registering means WordPress is aware that you have a block with some name. We'll see how the code looks. And the blocks are stored as HTML with comment boundaries. And currently you have three types of rendering. You have static blocks. Static means that the output of the save function is persisted to the database. I'm going to show you what that means. And that is enclosed in some HTML comments. Then you have dynamic blocks, which are a hybrid. The save function actually returns null, and WordPress stores a self-closing comment and uses a callback in the PHP side. And then we have the React blocks. For that case, we store an HTML node and we handle the rendering in the front end. So let me show you what all of this means actually. For example, this is what WordPress actually stores in the database. This is I think the content field of of the post table on a given post. And for example, this one, the first one is actually a native WordPress blog. As you can see, it stores an static HTML representation. It's enclosed in comments. This is a native image blog. Again, it's static. And for example, this is our gallery blog, which is rendered via PHP. And as you can see, it's a self-enclosing comment. And then we have a React blog. I'm going to show you what we did there. But as you can see, a React blog is also HTML enclosed in some comments. So what WordPress does is just go through this code and resolve the way it needs to render. For example, in this case, it will just output this HTML, which is static. In the gallery case, it will use the render callback on the gallery block, which means, let me show you how this works. I don't have any samples of static blocks from Planet 4 because we don't do that. We're just using dynamic blocks for everything. And this is, I chose this because it's a simple example. This is what you do on the editor side to register a block. So WordPress is aware that there is a block and you can choose it when you are editing. And as you can see, in this case, we have this save function. This save function actually tells WordPress what to store in the database for that block. As it returns null, it won't store any HTML. It will just be a comment, a self-closing comment like this one. And it will hold all the attributes for it. So then you have like a reflection of that block in the PHP side, where you actually call register block type again with the same key, which is the block name here. And you have a render callback that will handle the rendering on the front-end side. So this code here, the gallery actually renders, let me show you, to this. This is a native block, as I showed you. This is static HTML. This is an image block, it's also static. This is the gallery block, which is rendered by us in PHP using a Twig template. It's all PHP. This is our React block. And I show you how that is rendered in a moment. So for the PHP blocks, in most cases we have a, let me show you the gallery block. We have a server-side render component, which is provided by WordPress, and it will render the block using the PHP function. So you actually have many render logics happening at once. You can have some parts of it on React on the editor side and some parts on PHP. And this has been pretty controversial so far for WordPress. This way of rendering everything on the server side, because in most cases, the blocks you need to do are dynamic. And if you want to provide a good editing experience or a WYSIWYG experience that we are trying to do, this actually is blocking you from doing that. So we need to use React in the front end, so we can use the same logic to render the editor side of the blog and the front end side. And let me show you how we do that. As you can see, this blog looks exactly the same in the editor when I'm editing. It's a WYSIWYG blog. You can change its properties here, or the URL or whatever. You get feedback. And in the front-end side, it looks exactly the same. This will be harder to achieve if you had to write the code for rendering the blog in two places. Or if this was a server-side render blog injected here, it's actually easier to do everything in one place in React. But at WordPress does not provide a way to do that yet, like an official way. We had to do a few changes, and the changes are pretty much this. Well, I already went through this. So the React way of rendering blocks needs a few changes. For example, we needed to export WordPress default webpack config just to add a front-end index, a new front-end build. So we have two different builds, one for the editor and one from the front-end. Then you have to include that build. Let me go through the files. This is where we include where we create a different webpack route for the front-end side. We have more things here, but the main things are these two, the editor index and the front-end index. So then we include that front-end index in the website as this. And we need to add some dependencies to it. This is the main one, WP element, which is actually React. It's a wrapper WordPress did for React. Then we have some things that we are using for the spreadsheet block, like the localization function, API fetch, some utility functions just to fetch the spreadsheet and do some things. But the only one you really need is WP element. So then if you go to the spreadsheet block definition, where you register the block, you can see the seg function does not return HTML and this does not return null. That actually was moved to this deprecated code here. I'm going to tell you what that is. And we have this front-end rendered wrapper function, which actually Peter did, which just calls well, it's just a wrapper to call this component, but this component is a very simple component, which renders a tag, an HTML node, which has nothing on it. It just has the class names that are inherited from WordPress. This is automatically given by WordPress. Then we have a blog name, which is just a blog name. And we just do pass the attributes as JSON to some data attributes in the node. As you can see in the sample post content, this is what we see on the React side. This is rendered by the front-end render function. And this is actually stored like this to the database. So let me go back to the blog. So WordPress expects the save function to return static HTML or null if you are going to use the PHP rendering. Any changes to the save function are pretty likely to break the editor. So we had to do this deprecated assignment here to actually tell the editor that this is what we were saving before, and this is what we are giving the editor now. This does not apply if you are building a new block, but for all blocks that used to return null, this is very important. That's why I added this comment to the front-end render function, because making changes to the signature of this component, making changes to this HTML structure can cause validation errors in the editor. So it's just something to be aware of. But ideally, this shouldn't change because it's just exactly what we need to render a block in the front end. So when WordPress goes through the post and tries to render all the blocks, it will just...
Pablo, sorry to interrupt. Maybe something interesting to mention with the deprecated thing is that it's, so the way it causes issues is that actually whenever you save something, WordPress will actually look at the entire HTML structure, and when it's different, it will not be able to, it will throw an error always.
Right.
And so that's each element inside of it, and each attribute of an element needs to correspond. So each time you add an attribute, you would also need to add an entry to deprecate.
Right. Good to mention. Yeah, you have to be careful with attributes too. This is another very controversial topic on WordPress and how it handles the validation. Because you can see in long-running projects, this deprecated assignment is very long, even in some WordPress native blocks. It's getting longer and longer. So I don't know how they are going to handle that. I can see our deprecation part growing in time. Let's hope it doesn't.
Yeah, there was also a bit the idea of making the front end, the output of front end rendered something very generic that we can just pass attributes and block name to, so that those attributes never need to change or minimal amount.
Right. I don't know if actually changing the values of the attributes, of course, does not cause. Where is the sample? Changing the content of this HTML attribute actually won't change a validation error. It's just if you change like the signature, if you add something here, that will trigger the error. So as long as we don't change that, I think we are safe. Even if we add attributes to the block here. But I don't know exactly the internals of the WordPress validation algorithm. I have to double check that. But anyway, returning to the React thing. So when WordPress renders a page, it will go through all of these. It will render this H2, this image block, which is static. This is a PHP block. It doesn't have any HTML inside the comment. So it will use the render callback in PHP to render it. And then we have our static / React block, which will render this, which holds nothing. So we actually have to inject the block into this node. And that's what we do in this file, frontend index. Frontend index is a very simple file which just imports the spreadsheet frontend. And then it goes through all the nodes that has this data render attribute and uses React. Here is WP element to render the component with these attributes in the node. And that's it. And it just injects the React node in that HTML node we provided, which is this one, this div. So that's pretty much it. It's not officially supported by WordPress, but it's pretty straightforward. You just need to render a node and then include a script in the front-end side, and that script should just inject any components you need. This is a map of the components. This is the only one we had so far. And it injects the component in the node using React, and that's it. And this goes through the Webpack pipeline, so you can use JSX or whatever. It's compiled and built into a bundle. So yeah, I think I tried to add many samples here in this presentation. I will share the presentation with a few more samples. I didn't have time to add all of them, but it's pretty much what we covered. Maybe as a final note, remember that with great power comes great responsibility. So you might want to keep the front-end side light in kilobytes. I mean, if maybe try to refrain from adding third-party React components everywhere or things like that. And just keep an eye on the build size. Adding React actually to the front-end also adds a bit of processing to it for React to actually render the virtual DOM and do its diff. It adds quite a bit of logic, so yeah, I don't know, maybe it's heavy for low-end devices. And also try to encapsulate as much as possible, maybe as we did here, that we are just importing one component for the front end, and not just, we are not doing much assembly inside this file. Everything is the component needs, it's encapsulating in this spreadsheet front-end component. So that's it. I guess